So today is the day we traditionally celebrate Easter. Who knows if it's actually today or not? I don't want to mess you up. But when Constantine in the early 300s merged pagan temples and Christianity, things were not always as they seem. But we do know this. He did rise again from the dead. And so whether it's today, it's a good time just to remember. But you know, he was resurrected yesterday. And He's going to be resurrected tomorrow. And He's going to be resurrected on Tuesday. That's why we don't make a big deal about Easter with a lot of things, because I'm like, let's just live like He's resurrected every day. But it is good to remind us about it. And I'll teach on His resurrection some, because it is good basic reminders of what's going on. And speaking of Jesus, let me just tell you this. Christianity is taking a major hit in the West. And it needs to. Organized Christianity in the West is suffering, it's declining, and it needs to, because somewhere along the way, Christianity became about buildings, positions, performance, celebrity speakers, and we just lost what this whole thing was about. Christianity is returning to a simplicity. And if the rest of it implodes on itself, I think it's sort of good in a way, because we got our eyes on the wrong thing. And it's about a man whose name is Jesus Christ. And we'll talk a little bit about Him today. And so much of Christianity, what we call Christianity or the church, sometimes you'll go in and you hardly even hear about Jesus. But when you read in the book of Acts, which is the fourth book of the New Testament, which is basically, from what we can tell, a story, a narrative about the first 20 years of Christianity, it was very simple. And that's where we're going again. We're going to see a Jesus movement arise in the West that's going to replace the corrupted, disfocused, wrong, whatever church in America. And whatever happens to that church happens. And, you got to have some basic structure to know when to get together. All right, we're all going to get together here or there. And that's not what I'm talking about. But when the focus becomes off of what happened 2,000 years ago, it's become self-serving. And it's changing. There is a Jesus revolution that's coming that's going to marry. I think it's going to extend the Jesus movement, which was a revival of 3 to 4 years, about 50 years ago, that came out of the hippies, came out of the rebellion and the sexual revolution of Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, where there was 100,000 people in that park. And it was just pure rebellion. It's all about us and what we want to do. And out of that grew a movement that has gone all the way around the world, started major denominations. I became a Christian during that time. And so it's coming again. And it parallels what's happening in America. America or the West, Western Europe and us, it's all about us. And we can do whatever we want to do. And the Lord allows you to do whatever you want to do. The problem is usually in the end that leads to something that's not real desirable. And it leads to more chaos and anarchy. But either way, out of this, we're getting set up again. There is going to be another Jesus movement where He is at the center of it. In coffee shops, just mark my words, it may not be this year, may not be next year, but coffee shops, places of worship, people's houses are going to be some of the greatest moves of God that we have ever heard of. It doesn't have to happen in this building. The only reason we're in this building is because it sometimes rains in the park, okay? And it's just hard to do it outside. If you're in Southern California, it doesn't rain much, it's always sunny, well, maybe. But not in Georgia. One moment it's 75 degrees, and the next moment it's 45 degrees. And it just makes it hard. But the Jesus movement is coming. And it really is all about Him and getting back to the simplicity of it. This is a quote I've said many, many times, but I love this quote. And so I'm going to say it again, and you can just endure it if you've heard it again. It follows this statement that if you look at history, Jesus Christ has influenced history more than anybody in the world. I mean, even our dating method is about Jesus. They're trying to change it from 2023 AD because to 2023 CE because they don't want to say after death. Death of who? Jesus Christ. They move it to 2023 Common Era. Well, whatever. Who cares? But it's still 2,023 years after the death of Jesus Christ. Because then you go, well, where did you get that date from? But he's influenced people. When you think about what he did, he only ministered for 3 years. Who can pull off what he did in 3 years? He never wrote a book, never spoke on TV, obviously, never made downloads and YouTube channels, sent out, my notes actually say cassette tapes. That shows how long I've had some of these notes. Does anybody even know what a cassette tape is? You've probably heard about them. Huh? The 8-tracks. My first car had an 8-track. I added it to it. I thought that was the stuff, man. You got to play 8 songs. You couldn't fast forward or rewind. You could just sort of jump to the next song. Anybody old enough to remember 8-tracks? The rest of you go, boy, there's a lot of old people in here. I was young and just bought a car and had it in it. I was like, what is this? He never sent out newsletters, never traveled more than 100 miles from his birthplace, yet his message has spread around the world. No man is good enough to make that happen. There's just something supernatural on his life, and we could talk for hours about it. It was unique in his birth, unique in his life, and unique in his death, and unique in his resurrection. And at the end, this is sort of what we're going to talk about. But do you realize right now, there's an estimated 2.5 billion people who believe that Jesus Christ is God. Now, I honestly don't think 2.5 billion people are sold out to Him and following Him, but that's a lot, whatever it is. So, this is what's unique about Jesus Christ compared to any other world leaders, any other world spiritual leaders. He claimed to be God. I forgot to give you my quote. I'll do that in a minute. He claimed, I got off on cassette tapes. He claimed to be God. Just pause on that. Let me read to you what C.S. Lewis said. There's another quote I've said a lot. C.S. Lewis wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, books like The Problem with Pain, Christian Manifesto. He's dead now. He started out as an atheist. He was an Oxford, England professor. But anyway, on this claim to be God, here's the quote, C.S. Lewis. I am trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about Him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept His claim to be God. That is the one thing you cannot say. Because, let me go on. A man who is merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher if he was not God. He would either be a lunatic on a level with a man who says he's a poached egg. Not sure I've ever found anybody that said he was a poached egg, but if I did, he would be crazy. Or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. But this is the deal as we're talking about today. He claimed to be God, and he claimed ahead of time. In Matthew 20:17, I'm going to read that if you want to turn to it or listen. He claimed, I will die and rise again on the third day. That's why you can't just say he's a great moral teacher, because he said, I'm God, I'm going to die and rise again on the third day. If he was a great moral teacher, he just lied, which makes him not a great moral teacher. Or if he actually believed that he was God and he was going to rise again on the third day, he's crazy if he wasn't God and if he didn't rise again on the third day. This is basic stuff, but it's good. Or he was actually Lord. He's either a liar, lunatic, or Lord if he actually pulls it off. Of course, in here we believe that he pulls it off, and we're going to talk about through it here. But in Matthew 20:17, this is where he predicted his death and resurrection on the third day. Now, as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took, Matthew 20:17, he took the 12 disciples aside and said to them, We are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man, speaking of himself, will be betrayed to the chief priests. So he's prophesying what's about to happen. And the teachers of the law, that's the rabbis. They will condemn him to death. He's talking about himself, but in the third person. This is pretty bizarre. And we're so used to hearing this story, but let's think about it. If I come to you next Sunday and I say, in 3 days, I'm going to be betrayed by the FBI. And they're going to accuse me of some false crime. And they're going to kill me. But in 3 days, you're going to bury me out here at Dalton Cemetery. But in 3 days, I'm coming out of the ground. What would you think? You'd think I was a lunatic. And you know these 12 disciples had to think he was a lunatic too. The only thing that made them stay with him is they saw him do a bunch of loony stuff for 3 years. They saw him raise people from the dead, heal them of incurable diseases like leprosy, etc., etc. So we hear this story so much, but let it sink in. What if somebody came in here today and said that? Well, what I would say, okay, let's see if the FBI comes and gets you. Let's see if you die, and then let's see if you rise again in 3 days. And if you do, we'll talk. They will condemn him to death and will turn him over to the Gentiles, that was the Romans, to be mocked and flogged and crucified. On the third day, he will be raised to life. There is no other spiritual leader that I know of in history, I'm sure there's some out there, but at least major ones, that predicted their death and he's going to rise again on the third day. That's why you cannot be neutral about Jesus Christ. Christ just means the anointed one. That wasn't his last name. Jesus, the anointed one. That's why you can't be neutral about Jesus. And America is past being neutral about Jesus. That was 10, 15 years ago. They're openly hostile now. But that's Jesus' problem. It's not my problem. I'm not going to be intimidated by it. But they're openly hostile, openly coming against it. But that's all right. If He's really Lord and God, then in the end we know what happens. His reputation will live and those that don't won't. But this is the problem with Christianity if we're not careful. He predicted He would die and rise again from the third day. Have you ever seen one man raise himself from the dead or even heard of it? It takes something super over your natural or supernatural or something beyond you to raise you from the dead. Even Jesus at the end on the cross said to the Holy Spirit, into your spirit into you I commit my spirit. In other words, if I'm coming up from the dead, Holy Spirit, you're going to have to raise me, which is another part of the Godhead. Now, so we're going to talk about this because this is a big deal. This is one reason the church in the West is crumbling and basically worth not a whole lot. Huge swaths of denominations, huge swaths of Christianity try to explain away all supernatural events in the Bible. We talked about the virgin birth at Christmas. Today we're talking about Him being raised from the dead. Do not fall for this. Well, they say it's not rational and it's not reasonable and it's not logical. So, if we're not careful, we'll bring God down to something we can understand. And then all you've done is made Him like you and made Him an idol. If there is no supernatural in Christianity, I'm not going to be a Christian. Because that means it's no bigger than me. And I'm going to go the way of most of the West, which is in the religion of humanism, which means humans get to decide what is right and wrong. Humans decide what is truth. And that's where we're at in the country. And, the Lord lets us do that. But this is it. If there is no virgin birth, if there is no resurrection, then why follow God? You've just reduced Him to self-help and TED Talks. Seriously. He just reduced him to a great moral teacher. Well, you go, that's hard to believe. Yeah, it is. Let's be honest. It is hard to believe. But I want to believe in a God that's bigger than me, that has some discovery, that has some things I don't know about, or else He's just simply not worth following, and He probably doesn't exist. I know that's blunt, but that's just rational thinking. Paul said this in 1 Corinthians 15. So without the resurrection, let me put it in his words, 1 Corinthians 15:12. The great apostle Paul planted about 30 churches in the book of Acts. In the first 50 years of Christianity, wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. Extremely smart. We don't have time to go into all that, but you probably know that. So this is him speaking to the Corinthians, and there's a city, Corinth, Greece, which I would love to go to someday, but we'll see. Says this, but tell me this. This is Paul speaking to the Christians. Tell me this, since we preach, like Craig's doing today, that Christ rose from the dead, why are some of you saying there will be no resurrection, or there is no resurrection? Verse 13, for if there is no resurrection, then Christ has not, he's talking about themselves, has not been raised either. Now here's the key point. Y'all hanging on? And if Christ was not raised, then all our preaching is useless and your faith is worthless. See what happened on the cross? We love the story of on the cross. He hung on the cross. We know from Philippians 2 that He was in the form of God. He took on the form of man, humbled Himself. I'm paraphrasing really a lot. Hung on the cross, tormented by demons, and His Father's face turned away from Him to take our sins away from us. He took them on Him, and He didn't deserve it. That's momentous. But the resurrection from the dead was a symbol. See, He had to die because that's what happens to us without death, spiritual death. So He died, but the resurrection is a symbol that this thing, when we believe in Jesus, there is power for us. Our bodies will physically die, but there is spiritual life afterwards. We don't just go off into nothingness. And so without the cross shows the power, and it's like the seal of what happened. Now, there's a lot of Christians that say, and this is just why it just aggravates me, that Jesus didn't actually raise from the dead. And this is people in America trying to explain away the supernatural. And so let's talk about that a little bit. There's two main theories of people that saying this. So this is just basic training. This is classroom. This is Christianity 101 to get faith. The first one was this, is the body was stolen by the disciples. And then they hid the body. Let's talk about that a little bit. A lot of you know this. It may be old hat. First of all, you have to realize that the religious system at that time was corrupt. Judaism. They were the ones that got him killed because they were threatened by his popularity. They knew that he prophesied that he would rise again from the dead. So normally on tombs, there's just a tomb. Big old stones. That's what they did. If you were rich, you were buried in a cave and rolled a 2,000 to 4,000 pound stone over it. If you were rich. If you were not, you didn't get to do that. But we know that he was buried in a rich man's tomb, Joseph of Arimathea. They knew that he prophesied he was going to be raised again in 3 days. So they convinced the Romans to put 2 guards on it and put a Roman seal on it so that when the stone was moved, they could tell if it was broken or not. So we know that the tomb was opened. There is no ancient literature, nothing from the Pharisees or the Sadducees, the religious people, or the Romans saying anything about the Roman guards being attacked. Let me tell you, if they had been attacked, you would know about it. So it's not just attacking. You got to get this 2,000 to 4,000 pounds. If you get enough men, you could pull it off. But if you broke a Roman seal, there was serious consequences. Some of them say, well, the Romans fell asleep and they moved this stone while he was, without them knowing it. The Roman soldiers would have been put to death. It was just the culture of being on guard. If you fell asleep, something happened, you had been put to death, you would have heard about it. But you didn't. Plus, think of this. The 3 days before, all of the disciples were weak-willed, scared to death, and when Jesus was arrested, and they ran away. Peter, on the night that Jesus was arrested, a young maiden came and said, she just made a comment, hadn't I seen you with him? He denied Jesus Christ. I don't know who he is. He denied Jesus 3 times. Can you imagine what it would take for all 11 of them to all of a sudden get guts? And we're going to attack some Roman guards and not let anybody know about it? If you read in the Scriptures, the Roman guards were paid off by the Pharisees to say that they were attacked. They were given silver. But they didn't take it because they knew they would have been killed by their Roman people for letting this happen. So they didn't even take it. The last theory here. Are y'all with me? Is your mind all right? There's actually 2 more. Well, the other major theory is this, and then we'll talk about some other things. Is Jesus somehow or another wasn't killed on the cross. He just fainted. And then later woke up in the tomb and freed himself. People that say this are desperate. Because they don't understand the culture of how dead bodies were done. I mean, it'd be hard enough for us to get put in a coffin. Of course, you could push the top on. But in Georgia, you have to have a concrete vault around it. So you put the coffin in the concrete vault. So you got to get the coffin top off, the concrete vault off, and then 5-6 feet of dirt off of you. And not die of asphyxiation. That'd be rough. Now theirs was different. What they did is they put them in this cave and then wrapped them from head to toe like this with cloth. Covered their face, covered everything. Historians say it's somewhere around 100 pounds of cloth. You know, if I got enough toilet paper and put you like this, I did this when I was a youth pastor, and wrapped you up, it's got to be a lot of toilet paper. But the point is it's less than cloth. I can get you to points you can't get out, you can't make your arms move. Let alone cloth. Let alone breathe through all of that. And so, once he's in there, I just don't see how he's going to get out. But remember what happened at the cross. He was beat 39 times, or he was whipped 39 times on his back. Now, they just didn't use leather back then. In the leather thongs, they'd put glass, rocks, pieces of metal. History, of course, we don't know exactly what happened to him. We're just looking at history. History says that you could probably see his ribs on the back. All skin was gone. Then he was put a crown of thorns on. In this first room on the left, you can see a sample of what we think the crown of thorns was. I mean, these thorns are like this. These aren't like little rose bushes. So they put it on his head, pressed it into his scalp, blood everywhere. Then he gets on the cross. We won't even go into the cross. Horrific death. The Romans really drew things out. Talk about capital punishment with a fear to never do anything wrong. You can go back and read it. We won't even go there. But at the end, it says in Scriptures, and it was practice that we know from history, they put a spear in the side of those on the cross to make sure they were dead before they took them off. How did they make sure how did they know? In this particular case, the Scripture says blood and water poured out. I'm not a physician, but somehow or another after you die, the blood and the water separates and it comes out. It's not just blood. So, the whippings, the crown of thorns, on the cross, put in 100 pounds of linen, put in a tomb, put a 2,000 to 4,000 pound stone on the front of it with Roman guards out front. How many of you will bet that that's how he got out? It doesn't make any sense, does it? Either He didn't rise or He rose again. There's no really in between. The problem is, though, the tomb was empty. If He was actually in there, the Pharisees and the Sadducees would have said something, because you realize their whole world was threatened, and rightly so. It was a major sect in the Judaism that just tore their world up with Christianity. Let me end with this. And then we're going to do communion. Well, I already said that. One of the biggest things to me that shows to me that He's alive and He's supernatural. Just look at the growth of Christianity. That's not in and of itself a justification. But in the year 100 AD, they estimate that one person out of 369 believed in Jesus. In 1980, which was just a little over 40 years ago, 1 out of 27 believed in Christianity. Big jump, 15-fold. But then we see an acceleration. And so I want to give you like a hope, and we're going to talk about this acceleration. But let me go ahead. 1995, just 15 years later, went to 1 in 7. In the year 2000, I don't have statistics for the last 23 years. It's 1 in 3. Christianity is accelerating. Even as in the West, it's decelerating. They estimate over 100,000 people become Christians every day around the world. Right now, it's primarily Asia and Africa. South America is there, but not as much. Something is going on. And you think about the 11 disciples, because Judas betrayed them, hung himself, so they went from 12 to 11. These guys that denied Jesus ended up becoming the most radical people on earth at that time. Why do you say that? Because somewhere, if you read the Scriptures, it says when Jesus Christ rose again from the dead, He appeared to more than 500 people. 11 of them were Jesus Christ's disciples. Can you imagine? This is why they were radical. They denied Him and ran away from Him. They were afraid of the authorities. Some of it was confusion. They didn't know what was going on. Saw Him die, saw Him get buried, and all of a sudden, He's walking through walls, because He has a new supernatural body like you will have as a Christian. He's walking through walls. Would that just freak you out? In a good way. If I got killed by the FBI and rose 3 days later, and all of a sudden walked through the walls into your living room, would you become a believer? Do you realize all 11, well, it's actually 10, I'll give you the details. 10 of the 11 disciples all died horrific deaths in persecution from the Jews and the Romans. Horrific deaths. We're not talking about a bullet. Peter, the one that denied Him 3 times, to that young girl, the maid, as the Scriptures call it. They finally called him and said, "You're not going to preach about Jesus anymore. We don't like what it's doing to the Roman Empire." Because it was a tsunami, man, even with 1 out of 369. He said, "We're going to crucify you." Because, see, it was still Roman times. Man, this is intense. How many of you know how he died? He said, "I don't deserve to be crucified like my Lord." He said, "Well, we're crucifying you." He said, "Then crucify me upside down." Nobody. He saw something. Why would you die for a lie if you stole the body to be crucified upside down? Nobody dies for a lie. Not knowingly. Some of them were killed by the sword. Some of them, John, he was the 11th that didn't actually die. They tried to kill John several times. But God said no. The last time they tried to kill him, they got a pot of boiling oil and threw him in it. But Jesus said, it's not time for you to die. So they could not kill him. Let me tell you, you're not going to die before your time. If you're living for God and you're in His will, you're going to finish out your assignment on you. And you may go through some tough stuff. But they couldn't kill him. So they exiled him to the island of Patmos. That's another place I'd love to go. I don't guess I'll ever make it. That's in the Mediterranean. And that's where he had the trance or the vision of the last book of the Bible, Revelation. It's pretty cool. It's like, nah, it's not time for you to die. You got to write the book of Revelation. And so if you just look at the deaths, the many people, their lives have changed. I'm just telling you, people don't do what Christians have done to this degree without having experienced the risen person of Jesus Christ. I'm looking at my watch for your sake. I got my timer on. Every speaker needs to check themselves. Any comments? I'm done. Any comments or questions? So in review, the simplicity of the gospel is coming back about Jesus Christ. The massive things we do to keep these organizations going. I guess there'd be some people doing it, but Jesus is done with that. And, okay, I'll get you just a second. So, and we do believe in the supernatural. Are you strange? Yes. I mean, I'm trained as an engineer from Georgia Tech. It's not popular. But I'm not going to do what I'm doing for a natural God. Why? I don't get paid to do this. Why would I do this? I'm not getting any fame or fortune. I'm doing it because there is something bigger than me, and I've encountered Him.